All right, so this weekend we watched Dune on HBO Max, and I gotta say, straight off the bat, I love that movie. It's just such a delight to watch. It is such a feast for the eyes. Now, I am a little bit of a Denis Villeneuve fan. I really liked his Blade Runner 2049, really liked Arrival. Um, I really like his style. And I think Dune is in line with some of those other films, but um, there's something a little bit extra to it because it's the start of a franchise, I think. The most obvious thing to anybody who's watching this movie is just that the cinematography is on a whole different level. It is just such a beautiful movie to watch. You know, Denis Villeneuve has this way of creating these very simple but sci-fi scenes where there's not a ton of clutter. It's actually a very simple looking scene, but it gives you a real sense of scale and everything is just very deliberate. He makes great use of color as well. Everything is just so striking to look at. If you like the Blade Runner 2049 aesthetic, you're gonna like Dune. Now, I can also understand that not everybody will be a fan of this type of movie. From my understanding, Blade Runner 2049, even though I thought it was a gorgeous piece of film, apparently didn't do very well in the box office, right? Because not everybody is necessarily there to just stare at just frame after frame of art, you know. People go to movies for different reasons. A lot of people want to just be entertained by either an intriguing story or a very funny comedic story, or they want to be entertained by lots and lots of action, just constantly things going on, a CG fest that's characteristic of all modern Marvel movies now. So Denis Villeneuve's movie is not like that. Every scene seems very deliberate. It tends to be this calmness to it, right? Of course, there are action scenes in Dune, and there are some large set pieces, large even CG style battles, but that is hardly ever the focus of the movie. And I think I can't remember who said this. It might have been Chris Stuckman, but Denis Villeneuve's style is very much to always have a focus on the characters during these large CG battles. And it helps to give you a sense of the scale of things that are happening. So I really like that. I think some people will also be a little bit put off by the sort of frequent cuts during the movie to like dreams and I guess they're not really flashbacks, but even though the style is kind of like flashbacks, no, they're actually dreams of the future, Paul's visions of the future. So there are frequent cuts and yeah, they just come at seemingly odd times too, and sometimes they're just a lot of cuts into scenes that I don't know if they serve any purpose other than just being very, very beautiful. For example, there are literally scenes where you cut away and just watch rippling sand. So yeah, I think some people may be put off by this type of filmmaking, but I just think that it's such a gorgeous movie from beginning to end, every single scene, that it doesn't really matter. I just enjoy it so thoroughly throughout its entire runtime. And of course, all of this is helped tremendously by the score by Hans Zimmer. and the sound design. The score also helps to cement this idea of the size and scale of everything that is happening. I think nobody's going to be surprised that Hans Zimmer did a bang up job for this movie. Another thing I really loved about this movie was the costume and set design. Everything looks just fantastic. You know, some of the costumes are beautiful. Some of them are unsettling to see. Right. I distinctly remember, right near the beginning of the movie when the Justice for Change or something. I can't remember exactly what that character is called, but when he like came off his ship to speak to the Atreides family, you see all these people with these giant headpieces that are kind of like, I guess, like an astronaut's headpiece, but it's giant, and just the way it looks is very unsettling. But it fits so well with that world, and it's just beautiful. And then there are costumes that are just frankly beautiful. They're later on in the movie. For example, we see Vladimir Harkonnen being healed in this tub and being surrounded by these healers, and they've got this. Even though the Harkonnen family, they all look kind of unsettling, in their facial features and the fact that they're all bald. But the flowy costume with the sleeve that goes right to the knuckles, but the fingers stick out through these little holes that are accentuated with rings. I thought it looked fantastic. It was so beautiful. Oh, another one that really struck me was the Sardauker Priest. Sorry, I have a hard time pronouncing these names. There was one scene where I guess they had like human sacrifices, and there's a priest just chanting, and he had this very unsettling movement while he was chanting to the to the to the army. Again, just fantastic set design and costume work. Of course, I can't forget to mention the Baron's design himself, Vladimir Harkonnen's design. Just very unsettling without being sort of the campy version that David Lynch did. Yeah, this realization of the Baron is just so much more evil and unsettling, and the way he floats up so effortlessly, and how he has this long flowing robe that almost makes it look like he's standing with extra long legs. That whole thing is just fantastic, and especially that scene where you see him sort of just like floating and up against the ceiling, like what you would see if you let go of a helium balloon inside of a room, right? The balloons just stuck at the ceiling. That's how he looked, and just fantastic. I think another very strong aspect of Dune is the world building. I feel like the world is very, very well realized. Yes, it takes place very, very far in the future, like 10,000 years in the future, right? And so it's pretty difficult to imagine what life is like, given such a distance in time. But he does things to kind of make things relatable and ground them, right? For example, he pays particular attention to sort of mundane and practical things, practicalities of living life that would apply to 10,000 years in the future as it would apply to now, right? So, for example, there is a scene where you see people tying down their aircraft during a sandstorm, right? Like that makes sense. That's something that people would have to do now, And 10,000 years in the future, if you live in a desert planet with sandstorms, you'd have to do it there too. But like you catch glimpses of these type of things, and it really helps to ground this world in in things that and so you feel like it's a believable world, right? There's a lot of sort of attention paid to the preservation of water in a desert planet, right? They have to have suits that sort of recycle sweat and moisture. You have tents that recycle moisture. You know, the fact that uh, uh, water and moisture is seen as a valuable gift. These are all things that you know would apply 10,000 years from now, like they would apply to our current times now, and so it really grounds that world and make it believable. I don't know why I spent such a long time on this, but I feel like that's not something that a lot of sci-fi movies do well. They tend to create this thing. Oh, look at all the advanced technology, and and people are just doing things, and you're not really. It's less believable. It's much better and much more believable when they ground things to things that we know today. Just as another example, I'm going to draw some parallels with Star Wars here. But in the world of Dune, right? People don't use guns and stuff very much because, as they explain, they use these personal shields that will block high velocity uh, impacts, and so bullets would effectively always be blocked by shields, whereas swords and knives would be able to penetrate those shields, right? So they sort of put this into the world to explain why people aren't just shooting each other with guns, right? And they do it in a way that isn't super heavy-handed. It just feels like a natural part of the storytelling. Compare that to, say, Star Wars, where people shoot guns and people use swords. Nobody really pays attention to how those two interact. Basically, if you're a Jedi, you just basically can't be hit with the guns. That's just that's just how they treat it in the world of Star Wars. Uh, they don't take it any further beyond that, right? Bad guys shoot guns at good guys. Good guys are untouchable because they use a sword, and so whenever you need to have the sense of stakes, while your bad guy has to come at the good guy with a sword, because it ain't gonna be, because that guns ain't gonna work. So that's an example of how Dune is different. Now, speaking of Star Wars, I couldn't help but notice the similarities between Star Wars and Dune while I was watching this movie. And from what I've seen on YouTube comments, uh, I'm clearly not the only one who sees the similarities. As some examples, right? So in Star Wars, you have this evil interplanetary empire that's trying to destroy a particular faction of virtuous people with special powers, right? Very similar to how Dune is. Um, there's this special power that the good guys possess, right? The protagonists possess. In Dune, it's called the Voice. In Star Wars, it's called the Force. Now, yes, I understand the Force is a lot more offensive. You can move things and throw things. Where so far in Dune, you've just seen the sort of, these are not the droids you're looking for type of effect, but still very similar, right? And of course, in Dune, you have these gigantic, huge lamprey-looking sandworms, where in Star Wars you have the Sarlacc, right? And they're both found in desert environments, right? Tatooine is also very similar to Arrakis. So there's just a ton of similarities, and one can't help but wonder whether or not George Lucas uh, took a lot of his inspiration from Dune. Now, from what I've read in internet comments, and I know that's not the best source of information, but George Lucas has not actually cited Dune as an inspiration. I think he's cited like Kurosawa films and things like that, not specifically Dune. And I find that hard to believe. For those who are wondering, Dune was written in the 60s. Okay, Star Wars is a set of films made starting in the 80s. And so clearly Dune preceded Star Wars, right? I understand there's a 1984 David Lynch movie based on Dune, but that's not the original, right? It's the original is the books from the 60s. And yeah, I just can't help but feel like that Dune had a strong influence on Star Wars. And even if George Lucas himself may not directly pull in influence from Dune, you can't forget that there's a giant team that helped realize the Star Wars universe. And I'm sure some of the set designers, costume designers, VFX artists who have worked on Star Wars probably did draw influence from Dune. Anyway, it's a fantastic movie, and I encourage you to check it out. I will say that the one negative that I've seen consistently in reviews for this movie is the fact that it's clearly a part one. And in fact, right from the start, from the title screen, it says part one. And the thing that I think people dislike about this movie is that they don't even bother to try and make this movie have some kind of its own finality to it, right? Because a lot of movies, I think, will sort of end off on a high note that has a sense of finality, but also opens the door to an obvious continuation. Where in Dune, the movie just goes and moves, and then just ends. Now, I don't find that to be a negative, because I find that the movie just it moves at a good pace, right? A Denis Villeneuve pace, which again may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I think it moves at a pretty good pace, and the entire thing is just so gorgeous to look at. So I don't mind. So after 2.5 hours, where it ends, I'm not dissatisfied, right? I'm not thinking, oh geez, I was hoping that this would lead to some epic third act CG, mindless battle with a CG army a la Marvel movies. No, I don't need that, because the whole movie has been so well crafted and so beautiful to look at, that when it does end, I'm just left thinking, that's a fantastic world. I can't wait to see what comes in part two. So I'm not sure why everybody thinks it's a negative. I don't think it's a negative. I think a part two is almost guaranteed. I know it hasn't been, strictly speaking, greenlit by the studios, but I mean, given how beautiful this movie was, and just how strong it is, I think a part two is all but certain, and I am so looking forward to it. All right, this video is getting long enough already. Final verdict: Dune is excellent. You need to watch it, if only to help guarantee that a part two gets made. And that's it. I'll see you in the next one.